There it is, I do believe. Welcome to What's Real with Adrien livestream, where I like to take the conversation a little deeper. And today we're going to be talking about how to develop beyond our differences. And this is my little tribute, or my little contribution, you might say, to the situation we find ourselves in the aftermath of the terrible death of George Floyd. And the ripple effect that we're seeing go through our nation, United States, and then out beyond into the global society is tragic as the whole thing is. There's something about that, for me personally, that I find inspiring and hopeful. There's a deep need for us as human beings to feel united and have some sense of solidarity. Now, I realize that this isn't across the whole entire population, but this is part of what I want to talk about. In order for us to move on, and in order for us to move forward, I think we need to understand some very important, and in a certain way, relatively simple. I hope I can make it appear simple so that you find some clarity here, because that's what I believe we need. You know, I often quote from my book, Seeing Beyond, when we see something clearly enough, the energy to do something about it comes naturally. And in a certain way, I think that's what we're seeing, right? I have not been able to pull myself to watch the video that there apparently is of the actual death of George Floyd, but I hear it's pretty impactful, right? I think it must be, because something about that has sparked an awakening in a large portion of us. And this is what I would say is clarity in a certain way. Now, it doesn't mean that clarity is perfectly clear, right? There's many levels, which is what we're going to be talking about, to development, to understanding how to work with things, understanding how to work with ourselves, which is what I would usually say is the primary concern, the most important thing. And I hope that I can add some clarity to this conversation and some value for you as you're trying to figure out what it is you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to feel about the whole thing. You know, I'm certainly not here to tell you how you're supposed to think or feel about the whole thing. I'm actually just hoping to add a little light, a little more clarity, as I said. So we're going to start by talking about development. And I'm going to use a very famous, very simple diagram that is typically considered or called Maslow's pyramid, or Maslow's hierarchy of need is another way of another name for it. Now I have a couple things here for you, so we'll see if we can't pull this up. So there's hopefully you can see that, and you can still see me. It looks pretty good. This is a really simple diagram, and to talk about how we develop as human beings. And so I'm using this one not even because it's my favorite or anything actually, but because it's very famous, it's widely accepted, and it's pretty simple to understand, I think. I think you look at it and it makes a lot of sense right off the bat. Sometimes the most obvious things are the things we need to pay attention to closest. So this is part of why I'm pulling this up. Okay? As you're looking at the diagram, it's a pyramid, as we said, and at the very bottom of the pyramid are some really basic things that if we don't have these things taken care of, it's really hard for us to develop. By the way, this whole thing is about kind of like, this is like the natural flow to a human life. Like everybody kind of wants to be in the self-actualized space of this pyramid, right? Where we're doing our deepest fulfilling thing, where we found our purpose and we feel connected and we're feeling impactful in the world, and right? So this is the road we have to travel, you might say, on our way to the top of that pyramid. Now, before I talk any more, actually, because it just popped in my head, I want to make it crystal clear, and I'm sure I'll say it again, because none of this is about being better. Okay, this is about having a certain understanding, mostly of yourself and your place in the world, right? So just because you might find yourself really still dealing with the bottom part of this pyramid doesn't mean that you're less than in any way, shape, or form. Okay? So I want to make sure that's really clear. But at the very base, it's the basic things, right? It's food, shelter, clothing, It gets even a little crazier in some of them. I think that's all warmth, right? It'll talk about air, like these basic things that we need to survive, right? Then we move up to the next level, which gets to be about security and safety. And this has to do with us being able to feel okay about the fact that we're going to be able to maintain this level of the bottom, if you can see that. Like, in other words, that I'm going to have food, not just today, right now, but tomorrow, right? This is the next level of development where we start to think about and feel okay about the fact that we've got our security needs taken care of. This also encompasses, of course, feeling safe. If we feel okay about these things, then we're able to move on to the next one, right? Which is more about relationships. This is going to be about feeling, a sense of belonging, a sense of being loved, a sense of, friendship and family. If we're lucky enough to have these three things fulfilled, then we can move on to the next one where we start to feel okay about ourselves, funny enough, right? We're feeling with self-esteem, right? Esteem needs, prestige, feeling of accomplishment, like we're able to contribute. Why am I talking about this in lieu of the George Floyd death? And again, the ripple that's going across the entire world. Because it comes down to the basics. And a large portion of us have still not dealt with some of the basic bottom needs. And this affects our ability to move forward. One of the central themes that I want to propose here today, the thing that I would love to see us develop closer to as we share this time together, can be summarized in two simple sentences. Though I am not you, I am not separate from you. Though I am not the world, I am not separate from the world either. Though I am not you, I am not separate from you. When you're starving, when you're feeling like your life is uncertain, like if you have to fear death on an ongoing basis, you're not going to understand what I'm saying when I say, though I am not you, I'm not separate. Matter of fact, not only will you probably not understand it, you won't care. And the level to which those needs are met is the level to which you'll be able to hear those words in a real way. Now, I'm assuming that probably most of the people watching this video, because I kind of know my, the people who follow and what's my demographic, you would say, right, have probably got these three levels fairly taken care of. So this means what? This means what for you? What does this have to do with you and what's going on in our country, in our world? It means, first of all, you have to acknowledge that you probably do have these things, because the truth is, even though you have these things probably fairly taken care of, you probably got some money in the bank, you certainly, hopefully have a family and you feel somewhat connected to them, and you feel relatively safe. Now, that's something that gets called into question during times like this. It's some of its usefulness, by the way. But the truth is, a lot of us tend to still be totally wrapped up in these three bottom levels. Even though you got money in the bank, or you really don't have to worry about tomorrow's meal too much, you still spend a great deal of energy and conscious thought preparing for it. Now, I'm not trying to tell you to not steward your money and to not take care of your life. I'm trying to tell you that you probably don't appreciate the gift that you have enough to be able to say, let's move on. Let's move on to this place that though I am not you, I am not separate from you. See, if you're still holding on to these places and someone disrupts you in this place of security, let's say, we got rioting going on, and it starts to, if you're not really feeling secure in these bottom levels, you're going to fall right back to them. And your heart is not going to stay open to, though I am not you, I am not separate than you. You're going to fall back into your development. And you're going to say, God, I can't wait till this is over so life can get back to normal. By the way, I understand that sentiment. I'm not saying there's anything even wrong with having that thought. Only if it closes down your heart. Though I am not you, I am not separate from you, is an open space. And in order to cure these ills that we're seeing, this space needs to be accessed by as many people and as deeply as we possibly can as a human being. And this is where development comes in. Because if you've got these first 3 layers taken care of, then you have the ability to move on. And I'm asking you, and the world's asking you, to do so. What does this mean? It means do some of this inner work that I'm always espousing, right? It means understanding your inner world. Now, by the way, if you're somebody who still doesn't have these 3 basic levels taken care of, this still applies to you almost in the same way. Almost in the same way, because what you're going to do is find the place that you can access that openness. It will help you transcend some of these lower level feelings, right? We're going to get into that in a minute because I'm going to show another chart in just a second. And that's going to have to do with more of what I would call a spiritual and energetic map, you might say, of development. And that's, I think, even more useful than this one. But I wanted to start here because it's very simple. You know what I'm thinking about? I think we've all probably seen it enough. I will just let that go. Maslow pyramid is a very useful tool to see the fact that we need to take care. Here's the basic thing too, right? If you're somebody who's starving, or if you're somebody who's really concerned with your safety, and by the way, this doesn't have to just be your economic situation, right? If you are growing up in an abusive household, this household could be wealthy, but your parent or parents are alcoholics, and their mood swings are wild, and sometimes they're even violent, you're not going to be able to move on because you don't have this sense of safety and security. And it doesn't mean that you won't make some money, because you probably will. You've had this example played for you, but you're still going to fall back when times get tough to these lower levels. If you're somebody, again, who's still on the bottom, still struggling with this, by the way, and I'm sure there's plenty of people watching this that will find that's their place, right? Like they don't feel very secure about, maybe tomorrow's okay, but man, next week, am I going to pay my bills, right? One of the best ways to begin to transcend that, to work your way through it, is to, believe it or not, let go of it at least a little bit. Which is to say, find the places of gratitude in your life, right? Because if you're totally obsessed with this lower level stuff, it's very hard. It's a cyclical sort of thing, right? You're finding yourself, you worry about it, and then you create it in the same fashion, right? Because your fear keeps you from moving beyond. We're going to get into this a little bit in the energetic chart that I'm going to turn on in a second. But what I was trying to say too is if you're at this lower level, it's going to be very hard for you to access this space because you're not even going to care. It's the same thing like if you're at an even higher level, right? If you're at the 3-4 stages there, like you're teetering on that place, and someone interrupts your world, like I said, depending on where your default place is, that's where you're going to fall. Again, I'm going to turn on the next diagram, which is the Hawkins, David R. Hawkins map of consciousness. Now, this is an approach to more about feeling, I would say. And it's even deeper than that, but it's an energetic sort of quality. Matter of fact, he actually puts a number quality to each one of these feeling states, right? These levels of consciousness, what you're conscious of the most, where you find yourself the most is what this is about. And he gives a number quality to it. He says that these energetic qualities, they resonate at a certain frequency. So understanding where you sit on this can be very useful. I know I've used this in office work with people, and I've had some pretty tremendous results from it, because people all of a sudden look and they say, oh my gosh, I realize I'm so low on this chart. And you can see it, it starts with shame. Shame. If we're carrying deep shame around with us, it's going to be very hard to hear, though I am not you, I am not separate from you. If you're carrying around fear, which is a few up, actually, believe it or not, right? We got guilt, we got apathy, where you can't deal with anything. You feel no desire. It's all hopeless, right? You could feel the low energetic quality to this, right? If this is where your standard, if this is your MO, so to speak, right? Where you find yourself a lot, it's going to be very hard for you to move on until you see where you are and realize there's something more. Till you start to do the inner work. Now, here's what David Hawkins would say about this chart, that most of us, I believe, are somewhere between the 150 to 175. So we're somewhere, 150, 175. So somewhere between anger and pride as a nation. That's like taking the whole entire country and the enlightened beings that live here, and the lowest of them. When I say low, I don't mean lesser than, right? But the people who are really struggling with shame and really deep issues that they find it hard to get out of bed in the morning, right? Totaling them all together, we find ourselves at about 150, 175 on a good day, right? This is what I want to share with you today. That wherever you find yourself on this scale, there's something above it, right? There's a place that is calling you. I would say that it's your destiny. Your destiny is to move up this chart. One of the best ways that you can do that is to start to find the place within yourself that recognizes, though I am not you, I am not separate from you. Though I am not the world, I'm not separate from the world either. The energetic quality that lives in those sentences can elevate you immediately if you can open your heart to it. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to have hard work to do. If you're finding yourself generated around fear, which is really commonplace, by the way, for human beings to spend a lot of time, right, afraid of all kinds. The list is long, right? In our day and age right now, pick one, right? We got a pandemic, we got riots. You pick one. There's lots to be afraid about. And there's all the stuff that was there prior to that, right? It's an easy place to find yourself. If you find yourself there, realize that there's something higher. The next one is desire. Find a place, find this want, find this desire inside of you right now to understand, though I am not you, I am not separate from you. That's higher. Just wanting it. Just opening yourself to say, I can sense what he's saying there. And I would love that to be my reality. Just opening that way starts to elevate yourself. Now, there's a lot more. I can't get into all the things that one needs to do, right, to work your way up. I'm trying to point to the fact that there is a way up. This diagram is very useful, too, because, you see, if you notice anger is fairly high up, actually. That's because there's a lot of energy to anger, right? It really sparks us up. This is where a lot of us live. This is why we're seeing the reaction that we're seeing here with what just happened, anger. It's very useful to a point. Martin Luther King would certainly say, get active, get energized. If you need a little anger to do that, get riled up. Okay, let's not stop there. If we stop at anger, we get riots. We get looting, right? This is, by the way, why we're going to see that, because so many people are still living there, and they're living lower than that, right? So they're in fear and grief and guilt and shame, and then anger lightens them up and sparks them and gets them going somewhere else a little bit for a moment, and it can manifest itself as looting or rioting, right? If you find that that doesn't resonate with you, be thankful. I'm thankful. Be open-hearted to the people who are responding that way. They're finding their way up the chart, just like you are. Though I am not you, I am not separate from you. They're working their way up the chart. If you find yourself higher, if that's where you really feel like you live, wonderful. Move up. Keep going. Because we need more help that way. Like, I just talked about Martin Luther King. That man was obvious. I'm not saying he was perfect. We know he had history and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter, because in a large way, he was very high on this scale. That's why we still talk about him today. If he stopped at anger, it wouldn't mean as much. Martin Luther King is pulling you, me, up. Pulling us up the chart. Get in touch with that. Start trying to understand, how is it that I can move to the place where I completely understand what Adrien says when he says, though I am not you, I am not separate from you. Though I am not the world, I am not separate from the world either. There's a place inside of you that's beckoning, and we need it. If we didn't have Martin Luther Kings in our life, we'd be at a very low state indeed. Trust me. David Hawkins has a theory about that, right? It's like these people help keep the whole thing together on an energetic level. Like without these people, we would fall apart, because the pyramid is that way, by the way, right? There's way more people at the lower aspect or lower end of that pyramid. That's okay. They're finding their way up, but they need our help. Again, it doesn't matter where you are, you can help. One of the best ways you help is to move to the next level of wherever you are. This is the most important thing that you can do. Now, I typically, don't worry, honey, it's okay. My dog's trying to come over. She probably feels my passion, right? So, yes, good girl. So, I'm sorry. The most important thing that you can do is this work. I typically avoid these types of conversations because they fall into the political realm very quickly. And I think the political realm is important, but it's really low on the scale of things, actually. And I think we all know it. I'm not saying that we don't care about politics at all. I'm not saying that we don't vote. I'm not saying we don't go protest. We can't stop there. Stopping there is what causes what I talked about last week, which was the repetition, history repeating itself. We're not moving up the scale enough. Most politics is right around desire and anger, I would say. This is why it riles us up so much. It's not as evolved and as deep in a certain way as it seems. Now, again, it has its place, and it is important because it plays a big part in our life. But if we stop there, we're not going to see the results. By the way, why too? Because the people voting need to be higher in this scale. Because the people worth voting for need to be higher in this scale. Otherwise, we'll see the same thing. Don't sit around waiting for a politician to be high enough on this scale. You become high enough on this scale. When you heighten yourselves in this way, when you start to open your heart, when you start to do the inner work that's keeping you from being able to open your heart, you'll start to pull people up with you. Not because you're trying even, because it's a natural occurrence. This is the way it works, you might say, right? This is the energetic quality to the universe. but certainly to us as human beings. I mean, you could think about this in a very simplistic way, right? If a very charismatic, uplifting human being walks into a room, that person lifts the energy level in the room, right? It's always fun to see that person show up. And everybody's always like, hey, right? Of course, the opposite is true. Now, what happens in the room will depend on whose energy is higher, is more. I don't like the word more, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? It's just like that in our society. I knew so many people who, after Trump was elected, were distraught. I mean, they were beside themselves. They couldn't hardly cope with life. They were so upset by the whole thing. And part of the reason why they felt that way was because they couldn't believe that people would vote for a person like that. That people were that stupid. That would be a word that I would hear. Though I am not you, I am not separate from you. That person's not stupid. That person's trying to figure it out. The question you should have been asking, if you're somebody who felt that way after Trump was elected, the question you should have been asking yourself is, how did we, my party, do such a bad job that he looked like a good choice? How? And I'm going to tell you how, by the way, because you forgot that though I am not you, I'm not separate from you. You got into I'm right and you better get it. I don't care which side. This is why I stay out of politics. I don't have a side like this. I hope you can sense that. I can see both sides, if you want to say it like, and it's deeper than that, because I don't even see sides, just like I don't see color. I see, though I am not you. If you can't operate from that, it's because you're still stuck somewhere on this chart here that I'm leaving up. You should look at yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it. That doesn't help anything. Look at yourself. Be honest with yourself. And then start to find ways to work your way up. Because if you can work your way up past anger, which, by the way, is the only reason that someone would say something like that and about an election and about people who voted for something, because they're angry, because they're confused, because they can't believe what just happened, right? It's disbelief, so to speak. But it gets motivated by anger. If you entertain that too much, you're going to get lost, and you're not going to get the things you wanted, by the way. I think that election was a sign of it. You lost a certain part of the population because you didn't connect with them anymore, because you didn't try to. You didn't understand how to. This is the same thing that I want to say about the black community, about any ethnic community that's struggling. Don't judge. Understand. That doesn't mean forgive every act that happens. Just like don't judge police. Understand. That doesn't mean don't arrest the man and do what's right by a man who kills somebody for no reason. This is the brain likes to do that. It's like either or. Either I open my heart to this police officer and I just let him do whatever he wants. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. That's a very limited way, right? That's either or. Either it's okay or it's not. No, it's not okay. I can still understand, like I said last week, that man had a story behind him that in a weird way made him do that. Doesn't mean we forgive him for it, but we understand and we hold him accountable. But we don't close our hearts. I believe it was Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know. He's a Tibetan Buddhist. Or no, he's not Tibetan. I think he's from Thailand. It doesn't matter. He's a Buddhist monk. Pretty famous. I believe it was him that in those circumstances, when we have to deal with somebody like that, we do what we have to do. Right? If we have to protect other people and that person needs to be, killed even, it's a terrible thing. I even hate saying the word, but if that's what needs to happen, we do it. but we don't close our heart to that human being. The moment we close our heart, the moment we've lost ground. This is why Martin Luther King would say, peaceful marching, peaceful protesting, because every time we revert to violence, we feed that whole cycle. The man was so high on the scale, it brings tears to my eyes, you know? So here we are, all developing, all of us. We need to be open to the fact that this is happening. We need to be understanding of this fact. Again, it doesn't mean we don't do what needs to be done. But by seeing this, I pray that it helps you understand a little bit of what's going on. If this person is not feeling safe, is not feeling loved, these first 3 levels of Maslow's hierarchy, they can't care so much about some of the things that you care about potentially, right? I always like to say, it's like, this might sound silly, but if somebody drops 50 pounds on your foot, you're not thinking about sex. Now, sex is wonderful, right? And you might like to think about sex, but if somebody drops a weight on your foot, you're not feeling sexy. You're feeling the pain in your foot, right? If you're dealing with these first 3 levels of our development as a human being that we all have to deal with, you're not thinking about the best way to behave. You're not thinking about these higher levels of the consciousness map. Or if you are, it's very hard. It's going to be very limited. But if you have some of that stuff figured out, own up to it. Realize it. Be grateful for it and start moving yourself higher. Because you moving higher helps that other person move higher. Gives that person space. What does Martin Luther King do for us? He inspires us. We're not perfect. None of us. We all are where we are. There's a place inside of you that's calling, that's beckoning you. Doesn't matter where you are, to move up, to rise to the occasion. I pray that you can see the beauty and the power in though I am not you, I am not separate from you. Though I am not the world, I'm not separate from the world either. We don't have any questions or anything, right? Any comments or questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, this is an incredible message for so many reasons. You hit on a multitude of issues as well as potential resolutions. I could not love this more because it makes me want to climb that developmental ladder.
I hope that made my day. I don't know if I should go here exactly because it's kind of a strange place to go, but every time I'm at the level of things here where I don't have a huge following and I'm not having some massive impact on the world in a certain way, right? And so this is work. I get butterflies in my stomach every time I start this camera or I'm about to, right? It's a tremendous act of vulnerability. I'm not trying to boo-hoo here. I'm just saying this is what it is. That's why. One person is enough for me. And honestly, it doesn't even matter in that way. I mean, it's wonderful. Certainly, I'm very grateful to that person. But I do it because I have to do it. Because if I pay attention to my inner world, which I try to do more and more every day, I hear this beckoning. And it asks me to sit in front of this camera and do this. And of course, the hope is that somebody says something just like that, which was so beautiful, and I'm so grateful to that person for expressing that. But I can't depend on that, right? I do it because I must do it, because it's called of me to do it, because I pay attention to my inner world and I read Martin Luther King and I say, God darn it, what am I doing? Right? Anything else? I don't want to drag on. I just love to say, as always, I thank you for your time, because it's precious. I feel compelled to say, so use it well.